go. Go ahead.
Let's go. Is this worker?
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay. We're here with respect to House Bill 159. And we did a lot of thought on this particular bill, and it's very, very important that we consider it in the context of larger electoral reform. The decision was made to take this particular bill and introduce it as a standalone bill so that the whole gamut of electoral forms can be considered without the tinge of the partisanship exhibited by the other side, the Democrats, with respect to this particular bill. The Heritage Center Foundation has found that the respondents in the photo identification and non-photo identification states are just as likely to report voting compared to respondents from the states that require voters to state their name. The same with respect to African American respondents with respect to photo identification. There is an issue, and one of the interesting things that came out today, so many Democrats conceded that there was fraud on a grand scale in some cases with respect to voter registration. Now, if there is fraud with respect to voter registration, it certainly is not a far jump to believe that there is fraud with respect to in-person voting. And I'm glad they pointed that out, and hopefully they'll be on board when we do the rest of the voter reform legislation, which will address issues such as the fraud in the registration process. We had a number of witnesses, and they were very, very clear that this is necessary to combat voter fraud, and it's absolutely necessary to combat the perception of voter fraud. It is imperative that we have clarification and confidence in our electoral process. And a lot of the cases, some of them going on right now, have stressed the need for equality and equal protection in all of our electoral endeavors. There was some talk, for example, about the college ID issue. And there were all kinds of hypotheticals stretched way out to the nth degree as to someone who might be disenfranchised. I don't know the exact number, but there's probably over 100,000 or more college students right now who are at our private universities, Xavier University, Dayton University, Wittenberg University, Hiram College, across the board, who currently aren't on a level playing field with respect to those students attending our public universities. And our goal is to, quite frankly, get them on a level playing field. We want everybody to be on a level playing field. Hence, the indigency addition to the bill, if you will, very simple process. The state is already geared up to do the photo identification. They do it at the Board of Elections. And with respect to the people that can't afford it, take a trip to the Bureau of Motor Vehicles and you get it done. Representative Huffman had a good amendment dealing with the fact that you could use expired driver's licenses. And there's no time limit on that. And that would help some of the elderly, perhaps getting up in the 85-year age and above, who may have the expired driver's license around and would still be permitted to vote. Let's remember one thing too. You can always vote absentee exactly the same way you can right now. That's imperative to note. So you've always got that opportunity to do that. People are encouraged to do that, and we will continue to do that. Part of the goal here is to clean up the ambiguities and problems prior to the day of the election so that there aren't a raft of provisional ballots and tough decisions that have to be made by very overworked poll workers. And we clean these issues up by requiring 4 simple identifications. And a lot of these problems are then eliminated at the day of election. And that's where the majority of the lawsuits have occurred recently with respect to day of election voting in Hamilton County and what provisionals get counted and what don't get counted. So that's one of the goals, and it's going to be an overarching goal as we address the rest of the electoral reform process. So thanks a lot for hearing us out on this issue.
Any questions? Mr. Speaker, I talked to Jane Platten of the Cuyahoga County Board of Elections this morning, and I asked her about this impersonating a voter. She said, in terms of someone going to a polling location and impersonating someone else, I have never seen it. It's never been brought to my attention that it has ever happened in Cuyahoga County. What evidence do you have that this is an issue anywhere in Ohio?
Well, I think there are a lot of people that haven't seen a lot of things going on in Cuyahoga County. That's why about 60 people are under indictments. I think that has to be one of the silliest things I ever heard of. How could anyone say with any certainty that they had never had any votes cast using someone else's name? What planet is she on?
I think what she's saying is that there's no one that's been prosecuted for that. There's been no cases referred to, any prosecutors.
Nobody's been prosecuted for a lot of things up there for a very long time.
Second of all,
surprise me.
how would you know? Maybe you have 1,000 people come without a photo ID. How would you know?
You don't know.
Mr. Mecklenborg, Mr. Blessing, there were a lot of cases cited about voter registration fraud, as you pointed out. Those cases seem to be easier to identify. Is the problem in the lack of examples because it's hard to tell if someone impersonated someone else? You said one case, but do you think there are thousands of this happening in Ohio that we don't know about?
Look, let's first point out that the other elections, Board of Elections persons from Cuyahoga County testified in committee that this was very, very necessary to guard against that particular issue. The answer is, do I believe it happens? Yes, I do believe it happens. It's proving a negative. It's impossible to prove a negative. In other words, how do you prove fraud doesn't exist there? That is the problem with it. In Hamilton County Director Amy Searcy, I quoted her on the floor saying, all it means is that she, Amy Searcy, at one given point in time, can't necessarily identify it. We all know that the passions that are a recent election inspired. And we've got situations, for example, in Hamilton County where they take kids out of public school, public high school, bus them down to vote early, give them Democratic sample ballots only, and then try to pawn it off as a field trip. Now, if this kind of stuff is going on, I believe that that type of stuff is going on all the way through the electoral process, from the registration up through the final counting. And we're going to do a complete overhaul of that. What gets lost in the translation is that voter dilution is every bit as important as voter enfranchisement. And this bill helps address voter dilution, as will a lot of the other initiatives we'll have.
Why now? Why so fast with this bill?
It wasn't fast. It wasn't fast. Let's get real
We
here.
had 2 hearings, right?
We had 2 hearings. We had 6 hours of debate. We had another 3 hours on the floor today. You tell me the Democratic Party didn't have the opportunity to put forth their positions on this bill? They most certainly did. We brought their witnesses in from Washington and St. Louis to testify via Skype. They had every opportunity to present their full position on this matter. And if you listen to them on the floor today, the vast majority of what they said was repetition of the same thing over and over and over again.
But still, the question is why did you have to move it in just 2 hearings? I understand your point about the testimony, but 2 hearings is still only 2 hearings, and it did move quickly from introduction through.
2 hearings is 2 hearings. It moved with dispatch, is the way I would look at it. And I would also say that we're going to be undertaking so many different election-related issues. And if you followed how it went last time, when you start getting into all these other election issues, you can get lost in the brush out there so many different ways. And the idea was to clear this one out of the way and then get down to the other matters, which are going to obviously take so many different issues. I mean, you can get into a debate about where the flags go on election day that can last as long as 6 hours or more. So, we got a lot on our plates, and once The testimony is heard once, twice, 3 times. Do you really need to hear it a 4th, 5th, or 6th, or 7th time? We must be, I think, very cognizant of the amount of time we have to spend on issues when it's repeating the same thing over and over again.
Could you expand on why it was important to do this particular piece right now?
Sure, I think I get where you're coming from there. I believe that this is a cornerstone of good, solid electoral reform, that you build backwards from the date of actual casting of the ballot. And that is still where 80–90% of the people vote. Over 90% of them or more are voting with a photo ID already. You build backwards from that, and you make it sound where most of the people are already voting, and make a sound, solid decision that treats everybody equally, and then you work in other directions with respect to the voter issues. And that's why we approached it in this fashion.